Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Thursday of our HiPAM webinar series. I see Andrew is on, so Ruki, if you can just give him a share screen access, we're gonna mix things up a little bit today, and we're gonna start with our deeper dive, and start off with that, and hopefully stimulate discussions. We'll still go over our data overview, but I think there's been an increased awareness and desire for updated information on everything vaccine. So we have to bring in our resident pharmacist, Dr. Andrew Abe, to give us some updates on the vaccine aspect, and then we can discuss some of the other the other impacts in terms of maybe the state nationally. We have a new administration that just came in yesterday, so projecting for some of the impacts and how that might impact distributions for the state moving forward. So Andrew, hopefully we'll get more, but I see some very familiar names. Unfortunately, I wish I could see your faces. Go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Thomas. So again, hi, my name is Andrew Abe. I just wanted to give a high-level overview of the current status of the vaccines that we have available here in the United States, and and hopefully, spark some conversation regarding the recent conversation between should you give one dose versus two, where the evidence is kind of leading us, and just availability of vaccine in general. So I do want to, each slide, I'm just going to talk about one of the current vaccines we either have approved or coming in down the pipeline. And the first one is pretty well known. We have Pfizer. I want to note so this is, since the last time I gave this presentation, we have two vaccines that are now under emergency use agreement. I do want to stress that this is not approved through the traditional fashion that vaccines are approved. This was approved through an emergency use agreement. So there's a lot of things that change along the way that's a lot different than the usual approval. Pfizer is the only vaccine currently approved for patients 16 years and older. All the other vaccines, well, only other one really is Moderna, now it's 18 years and older. One of the things you may have heard initially was a brief slip up. The label included doses only, it's a multi-vial dose, meaning each vial contains more than one dose. Initially, they labeled it as 5 doses. They have a lot of complaints saying that we had up to 6. They subsequently changed their labeling to read that there are 6 total doses, not 5. Storage, as you are very familiar with, is very cold. They gave updated storage recommendations, what to do if they are left at room temperature or how to thaw them. The thing that you'll notice is that between Pfizer and Moderna, unfortunately, Moderna has a very specific recommendation to not store below 40 degrees Celsius, which means you can't store these vaccines in the same fridge, which if you have a freezer specifically for the Pfizer vaccine, you would not and could not use it for the Moderna vaccine as well. The approved dosage is every 3 weeks or 21 days apart. Common adverse reactions I have listed here, which is from the package insert, which is from clinical trials. Some things I wanted to update you on that have been developing since approval are noticing of anaphylactic reactions. Through the VAERS system, the vaccine adverse event reporting system, they noticed 11.1 anaphylactic type reactions per 1 million vaccines administered. They noticed a majority of those occurred within the first 15 minutes. Anecdotally, if you guys received your vaccine, you may have heard them tell you to wait about 15 or 20 minutes or so afterwards. It may be due to this, and that's just good practice. The last thing I have on here, I did a query through the VAERS system as well too, and this should not be taken as the actual positivity rate after vaccine. These are only the ones that have been reported. These are not the true numbers. These are the only ones self-reported through the system. About 146 so far reported positive COVID after vaccination. For the Moderna vaccine, like we talked about, is approved 18 years and older. It is stored a little cooler than Pfizer. Once you can store them at refrigerator up to 30 days or a month before use. Again, the one thing I want to note is that should not be stored on dry ice or below 40 degrees Celsius. So these should not be in the same refrigerator or freezer. Little difference, about 28 days apart. This multi-dose vial contains 10 doses each. Since Moderna was approved after Pfizer, they do not have accurate data regarding anaphylactic type reaction percentage after administration. And through the VAERS system, there's about 19 people reported positive COVID tests after vaccination. In regard to the question, can you only give one vaccine per person and not give the second dose? In the package labeling, it explicitly says to give both vaccines, both doses. And the reason for that too is because that's how it was clinically studied. The efficacy and safety has been shown for that. And not just titer counts or efficacy, but also durability. And that's something that's not discussed very often, but how long does your protection last is unknown. So there's a lot of unknown risk factors associated with giving one dose only and not the second dose. And the United States has stood behind that as well too. On the horizon, one of the biggest controversial things previously we had was AstraZeneca's vaccine, which was labeled as average of 70% efficacy. While this vaccine is approved in UK and other countries for use, the biggest issue that we had in the United States is that our FDA took a look at the data and said, not good enough, basically. Instead of submitting new data, what AstraZeneca has done is they may wait actually for their new data done in the United States using a 2-dose regimen. And this data is expected in early spring. Based off of the pattern of approval, we may not see approval of this vaccine in the United States until late spring or summer. So we may have to wait a good amount of time until we see AstraZeneca's vaccine come to market. Again, this is 2 doses 4 weeks apart.
Hey, Andrew, quick question, and I want to make sure that we address the question in the Q&A. For the AstraZeneca, I've seen that it's been approved in the UK as well as a few other countries. So it's just I just wanted to confirm that it's because FDA is probably one of the most stringent bodies when it comes to approval.
Yes, Thomas, like you will see for a lot of drugs in other countries, the FDA is very strict in regard to this, but I think they were a little, usually this happens, this is a unique situation, but usually when you're the 3rd or 4th or 5th drug to market, they tend to be a little bit more, scrutinize you a little bit more. In this case, I was surprised they did such scrutiny, but the biggest thing that threw them off was not only the disparity in the reaction, but as you can see here, there was this one incident where a significant part of the group was only given a half dose, and they were given a full dose a month later. And that group had 9% efficacy compared to 62% efficacy in a cohort that got 2 full doses. And the FDA kind of shook their head, is like, why is there such a difference in efficacy when you gave less? And they weren't buying the data behind it. And usually when you get a retort like that, you have the option of either resubmitting data to explain what happened. But in this case, since they have an ongoing phase 3 study in the United States already, I think what they're going to do is wait. And this is speculation, but this is what I see the trend will happen, or that they would wait for this data to come out and potentially approve in later on this spring or summer.
Thanks. And then since we're on the Q&A topic, and I know you have a couple more slides and some topics you want to bring up. So the question is, with all the precision involved in vaccine production, how could there accidentally be 20% more vaccine per vial than intended? And this is, I'm assuming, for the Pfizer.
That's a fantastic question. I don't think anyone knew what was going on. Usually what you do when you have a multi-dose vial, you incorporate for what you would call error, right? Because sometimes you need to, some people prime their injections, some people waste a little bit. You know what I mean? Like you accidentally drop too little, drop too much, and there's some buffer put in there. But what people have found is that there was so much wiggle room in this one that it actually came out to 1 full dose. And what you had in the beginning when this drug was first approved was people were throwing away the 6th dose. Even though they had the ability to pull up a full dose, they threw it away, which it may sound bad, but that's what healthcare providers are trained to do is, you use up to what the labeling says. But because it's so much pushback, they actually changed their label specifically to include 6 full doses.
Got it. Thank you. And then a follow-up question to that. Does that not mean, or does that mean that the vaccine has been over diluted? And I've never seen how the vaccine is it come where it's you got to add the adjutant and mix it, or is it already just in a ready to go vial? I actually haven't seen it.
So for this vaccine, you would have to dilute it. When you dilute it, it actually dilutes to its full potency. It's just that what's included in the vial is overfill. So they said 5 doses, but it contained more than 5. I'm not sure where the miscommunication happened, but like they acknowledged it and they do recognize that now there are 6 doses. So we are basically getting more doses per vial, so that's a good thing. But initially that was a huge slip up because a lot of doses were wasted because of that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, thanks. No further questions right now, and apologies for interrupting it, but I wanted to make sure, since we were on the AstraZeneca, we throw in those questions. Thanks.
Yeah, those are great questions. They do address it quickly, and the very unique thing about the situation we're in right now is that your feedback matters. Someone complained because they noticed a 6 extra dose, and it got to the point where the FDA actually had a label change because of that. So the thing is, unlike a usual drug release where a lot of these problems have been vetted out before it gets to the consumer, it's not like that in this case. Your feedback really matters to the company and to the FDA about how and what's happening in the community.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andrew.
So the next one we have is J&J. This one is very interesting. This is one of the ones I'm following very, very, very closely. Initially, when we first talked about this was the only company evaluating a single or 2-dose drug regimen. Their phase 3 data is estimated at the end of January. Based off of current trends, you could see delivery by March or mid-March or late March of the doses rolling out from J&J, and that's just an estimation. What they saw, they kind of pivoted after they saw the demand for more vaccines and our need not matching it. They actually pivoted their release of their clinical study and discussed more about what the 1 dose looks like. So when they released their phase 1, phase 2 studies, like the early trial studies, not the pivotal, not the late stages, but they just released their early phase 1, phase 2 studies and saw that at about 29 days after their first dose, 90% of patients had neutralizing antibody titers. At 57 days, 100% had neutralizing antibody titers, and this is after 1 dose. And this was maintained through day 71, and that's just a durability of effect. I do want to put a little asterisk here, right? Just because someone has neutralizing antibodies does not mean they're going to have protection against COVID. That's where the CDC is very specific. When you're evaluating vaccine efficacy, you're looking for confirmation of COVID-19. Which J&J has not released yet. With their second dose of the vaccine, they noticed the titers increased by 2.6 to 2.9 fold. What they also noticed, though, is that those in the more elderly population, 65 years and older, did not see as a pronounced effect and may have more side effects as well, too, which is common that you saw across other vaccines as well. So what we can expect from elderly population is potentially a less pronounced benefit and more potential adverse reactions. I do want to note that all the vaccines also had an appropriate CD4 and CD8 response. You might hear that from time to time, just as a little point. When you're talking about immune response and vaccine efficacy, besides just your antibody titers, your body also works in coordination with other immune responses, such as CD4 and CD8 cells, which prompts the full immune response in your body. What you can see here is that this vaccine is estimated to be stable at -4 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 years and 3 months at refrigerated temperatures. So it has a longer shelf life, and hopefully this will be coming out the data will be coming out soon regarding the 1 dose and the 2 doses.
Hey, Andrew, quick question on the J&J.
Yeah.
How, I know, so hopefully at this point, for all of our attendees and people who will watch the recording, we've done a good job educating that, Pfizer, Moderna are mRNA vaccines. Can you speak to, and not to get super in depth, but just, how, in terms of the technology of the J&J, how is it, how does it work for the layperson? Is it more like a traditional, flu vaccine, et cetera?
Yeah, it's more of like the traditional vaccine. It's not an mRNA type technology, and that's why you see the shelf stability at a higher thing. The mRNA vaccines, because of how it's made, needs to be stored at a lot lower temperatures. So the J&J and the AstraZeneca vaccines are adenovirus. I think one uses adenovirus, one uses, I think, a different type of virus vector, where they insert the spike protein into it, and it elicits an immune response in the body.
So let's just pretend, and hopefully I'm not taking away from anybody's questions, but I'm, with a lot of focus being on vaccine refusals or declinations, a lot of the, in social media and in some of the news sources, a lot of the main reasons are, I've heard that the vaccine will, if I get the Pfizer vaccine, I'll get COVID or I'll change my DNA. Obviously, that's for the mRNA vaccines. I'm sure people will have similar questions as the J&J rolls out. What would be the appropriate answer for someone who asks, well, what about the J&J vaccine? If I get it, will I get a less serious version of COVID? And this is where I defer to you and our virologists in HiPAM.
So at this point, none of the viruses, none of the vaccines studied in the United States are like full inactivated viruses. Those are the ones that you may see in, I believe China had a couple that are inactivated full vaccine viruses. In general, regardless of what vaccine you get, none of the vaccines you get carry a risk of you getting the actual viral infection. What this does, you can think of it as chopped up parts, right, that they recognize as a target. So enough to elicit an immune response, but not enough of the full thing to actually give you the viral infection. And if they're talking about differences between this and mRNA vaccines, yes, it does incorporate into your DNA to make the proteins. There is no other risk that we've seen thus far with that type of technology. If they want to, J&J is a more traditional type of vaccine.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Novavax, we didn't really talk about this last time because they did not start their phase 3 studies yet in the United States. This is something that's just coming to market. It's a little different of how the vaccine is presented. There's a lot of fancy words. I put nanoparticle vaccine composed of trimeric full-length SARS spike protein. Basically, if you think of J&J as a spike protein put into another virus, this is just spike protein. It's taking up the chopped up parts of a SARS-CoV virus and presenting it to your body's immune system for them to mount an immune response. Whereas J&J and AstraZeneca put that spike protein into another inactivated virus for the body to attack the fake virus. What we saw in phase 1, phase 2 studies is promise of immunogenicity, meaning that it did produce an immune response. And we have a couple ongoing studies right now as well too. This one is a little harder to predict. There is no real clear estimation on when this would be available, even though they have a lot of claims as to efficacy. This one I would be watching on, but there's no real good data on it to share at this time. Thomas, I did want to add one more point about demand. And so again, this is very speculative. I do want to note that this is very speculative. This is not, I'm not in any way I'm not an epidemiologist, but I can say this is what I think of when I think of demand chain and supply. Here are some things that you want to think about in estimated manufacturing for 2021. Pfizer estimates about 2 billion doses, Moderna about 600 million, and these are individual doses. Each person needs 2 doses. J&J has not rolled out yet, but they estimate about 1 billion doses a year. AstraZeneca estimates about a little less than 3 billion. Novavax, if they get up and running, they said they can do 2 billion a year, but again, those are not yet approved in the United States. I did find some estimations on, based off the current supply, when would we have enough to reach some type of herd immunity? And again, very speculative. There's a lot of estimations out there between how much you need for herd immunity, how much you need in period. But I just want to give a point of discussion, I would say. A way to think about how herd immunity affects demand of vaccines. And so when you take a look at what you would need to effectively have herd immunity regarding immunizations, and you think of how many people we have in the entire world with a 2-dose regimen, to get these estimated numbers, what we're looking at is 10 to 11 billion doses. If we take a look at our current estimations, what we're currently producing, someone has estimated, right now without any other manufacturers, we have maybe 2 to 4 billion doses annually. If this does not ramp up or something doesn't change, we're looking at 2023 to 2024 before there's enough doses worldwide to effectively curve this. And again, very speculative. This is high in numbers. The flu vaccine isn't given this many vaccines each year, but also a lot of people get the flu. So this is a high-end estimation of what's happening. This is just food for thought, right? When you're thinking about what people talk about herd immunity, how many people need to be vaccinated before we see a real good cessation of spread, how many people there are to be treated, what our supply is, and what the outlook would be. So take this with a grain of salt. Use this for your interpretation when you see your own numbers. And just think about that, just because you have a number of how many people you need to treat does not mean our supply will get there immediately. There are always delays. There are always shortcomings with supply. And there will always be issues where we have mistakes, freezer goes down, we have delays, and I would not count on the full number of doses being there. So we should just take that into consideration. That being said, that's all the slides I had. I know there are a couple questions that popped up, so I'm going to take a pause here, Thomas, and we can switch over to that.
Thanks so much, Andrew. A reminder, everybody, if you do have questions for Andrew or for me in the future, please utilize our Q&A or raise your hand. One point to add on to what Andrew said in terms of, I know there's been a lot made in the past couple of weeks about potential, theoretical use of just getting everybody that single dose, just to get everybody that initial protection. And it's gone to the point where even I think UK, Denmark, and maybe a couple other European countries have approved that type of strategy for the vaccines. But from the studies, and Andrew, please let me know if I'm incorrect in this. They really, there's no data right now from Pfizer or Moderna because for the clinical trials they vaccinate everybody within that 21 or 28 day window for that second shot. So they can't speak to the efficacy of a single dose beyond that the 21 or 28 day interval. Is that true?
Yeah, so when UK and other countries spoke about giving 1 dose, I think they even went as far as to recommend in extreme situations you can take a vaccine of another company. I was kind of floored, I'll be honest. That's pretty unheard of to base policy on speculation. They're saying less efficacy is better than less people getting 2 full doses. And coming from an evidence-based background, that's not something I could ever really fully support. What I would be very interested to see is if that immune response shown with one vaccine from Pfizer and Moderna translates to a high enough threshold of efficacy for it to be appropriate. The thing is, drug companies are very smart, right? A lot of people may hypothesize they want 2 doses so they can make twice the money. However, if they can get a competitive edge with 1 dose, of course they're going to do it. The thing to consider is that when they are doing the initial phase studies, they may have noticed a decreased response to these vaccines. And that's why a second one was needed. So that's why it was developed at a specific interval. And that's something to take into consideration. A drug company would never try and break something to market they know will not pass muster. And they must have felt that 1 dose was not enough. And so I would actually side with that feeling, and that I would not recommend 1 dose until the data comes out showing that 1 dose would be sufficient.
No, thanks for that clarification. And then I remember that Dr. Berryman addressed this question, but it's worth bringing up again that our pediatricians and physicians on board, and our pharmacists, you, Andrew, have supported what the CDC is saying on their FAQ, that there's no maximum interval between dose 1 and dose 2 as long as you get that second dose for Pfizer, Moderna, for that booster. So I know with concerns in supply chain, et cetera, the goal is to get everybody that second dose. But if you can't get it within that 20, if you can't get it on day 21 or day 28, that it's not to get discouraged, become discouraged as when you get that second dose. If once again, if I'm being correct, please correct me if I'm wrong. You'll still get that full benefit, even if you might go a little longer in between dose 1 and dose 2. Oh, sorry, you're muted, Andrew.
So that's a very interesting point. I'll give a quick example. So other drugs that we know of that has a very discrete interval, they're calculated because things wear off over time or may not have produced the same immune response. The thing is, we just don't know. What you see in drugs that completely leave the body through a half-life, drugs that completely leave the body and leave your body with no protection, no titers, you have a repeat of the initial dosing. For a vaccine schedule, the thought is as soon as possible follow up. Very rarely did I see someone have to restart a vaccine schedule, but this is a little different. This is the first time we're having something quite like this where we just don't know. At this time, what I would feel in my gut is that each institution will probably take their own approach to what happens. Let's say 4 months from now, you forget to take it or somehow you don't take it. At that time, if new data comes out saying that it doesn't work, they may have you restart. But as of right now, because of the limited supply, I believe they'll just give you the next shot. And, I hate to say cross your fingers, but cross your fingers.
No, that's super helpful. And I think everybody on the webinar can be very appreciative of an evidence-based recommendations and practices. And, we're as it continues to be with COVID and all the responses, we're trying to build the ship or build the plane and utilize it as we move. So, vaccines especially is no different. Dr. Wu, prior to COVID, no non-replicating viral vaccines. Ebola is an example of a replicating viral vector vaccine. MMR, varicella, and flu are inactivated, killed, or live attenuated, weakened. Hep B is recombinant. So thanks for sharing that, Brian, Dr. Wu. I'll take that article and maybe do a deeper dive, but that's super helpful. I'm just trying to think to add, since we're on the topic of vaccines for everybody. The person who was heading Operation Warp Speed, I don't even want to try to pronounce his name, stepped down last week, and with the new Biden administration, if I had to give my best guess, there will probably be a change in some of their strategies and how they roll it out. That remains to be seen. So in terms of how it impacts Hawaii, and I know we have Dr. Behrman here and some other state partners, it's always been a state of constant flux, but even more so now as a new administration takes over and takes, and potentially changes policy at a national level, hopefully for good. And I know that there's been talks about utilizing the National Defense Production Act to increase production and also logistics of the vaccine. So just some things for us to keep in mind with the policies and the politics that are going on, and the potential impact for Hawaii. One question from Jim: can you advise on efficacy of giving one dose because the government wants to reach the most people and ensure the supply chain will support having the second dose available on time?
So efficacy of one dose, unfortunately there is none. Based off of how the FDA really defines efficacy, there were no studies done with one single dose looking at COVID efficacy, basically. They have some immunogenicity that there is some conferred, but no real data regarding overall efficacy. What you would have though with one vaccine is a potential reduced efficacy, which kind of means you would need more people immunized in general to get to that herd immunity through vaccination. As far as the government is sure that the supply chain will support having a second shot available on time, I am very reserved that the supply chain will be on time. If history showed me anything, is that if you expect the dosage to be on time, it probably will not be. There are a lot of different hindrances to manufacturing vaccines. Delays, storage, someone, again, left it out too long. So my worry is if you start doing the one dose and bank on a second dose coming, you may have a lot of people hanging for who knows how long before they get a second dose. So that's just a lot of worries. I think if we continue on with how we're doing, the most evidence-based approach would be to continue giving everyone the first dose, reserve enough for their second dose, and continue to roll out to high-risk populations. The one dose method is if it's my personal opinion, it looks like an attempt to show that there are people who are in the administration are trying to get to vaccine to as many people as possible. But from a science point of view, I can't see how that would be better than giving someone the full dosage needed.
Thanks, Andrew. Great. Couple questions, I believe comments from Dr. Behrman and from Francis and Jim. Dr. Behrman, vaccine is currently being allocated nationally to account for first and second doses. Vaccine providers are explicitly directed not to store or hold vaccine for second doses. The need for second doses is contained in the weekly national allocations. Thanks so much for that clarification, Janet. And then Francis, yep, thanks for the addition. Many of the healthcare workers locally have already received their second shot. So great news for our frontline workers. And then follow-on comment from Jim. But the best answer would seem to come from a supply chain expert. Agree, question mark?
So yes, they're always ramping up production. And they will say that their production will be there. I do agree with that. That they estimate and they project it will be there. But there is always something up with a very delicate production chain. You have one, if you think about it, we don't have a lot of factories producing all these vaccines. Millions and billions of vaccines are produced from maybe one or two sites. If you have one site that has some type of issue, contamination issue, one batch gets ruined, that's a whole allocation to a whole state that's gone. So I am optimistic that there will be appropriate distribution. But when you have so many doses being manufactured in one location, you run the risk of one small defect affecting billions of doses or millions of doses, I would say.
Thanks, Andrew. Very, very insightful questions and comments. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. We'll leave it open for a little longer for any additional vaccine questions, comments for Andrew. Andrew, will you be staying on for a little longer just in case, or do you have to head off? No worries if you have to head off. Oh, you're muted again.
I'll be on. I may be in transit, but I'll be here to answer questions. I'll be listening.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Andrew, for once again the very succinct and insightful presentation. I think it's always helpful to check in from time to time, especially as we get more data. I feel like every week, I'm sure you pay attention to it just like I am. There's studies that are peer reviewed and also preprints of phase 1, 2, 3, and also additional follow-on studies on all of these vaccines and side effects and potentials for scenarios for utilization. So another thing to keep track, but it's really helpful to have a pharmacist on board to help us kind of clarify a lot of these questions. So thank you for that. Yep. So one question, I'm not sure if Andrew can speak to that, but maybe some of our other participants can. So what is the state Department of Health doing with distribution? I can't speak to that as I'm not a DOH employee. I know Dr. Behrman, you're on if you want to approach that, but I think it's, they've been working very diligently at it, and it's not an easy issue, especially because if there's a supply chain issue at a national level, DOH can only work with what is being distributed to the individual states. And once again, whoever asked the question, I think it's worth noting that, with this big change in administration, there will be many changes that will to the supply chain, how that's being ran. I'm not sure, but there's a potential for Operation Warp Speed to be replaced by something new from the Biden administration. So we're going to see a lot of secondary and tertiary impacts at the state level. So what I can direct you to is the DOH website, and I'm going to bring up shortly in one of our slides the percentage of doses that that the state has administered compared to what they've received so far, and break it down by county. So hopefully that will provide a little bit of clarity, but that is a topic that I'm hoping to have on a future webinar, so we can better understand the distribution. Oh, sure, awesome. Thanks so much, Janet. Rukia, if you can give access to Dr. Berryman so she can answer the question. Janet, while we get you that access, the question is, what is the state doing about the COVID-19 vaccine distribution currently?
I think I'm unmuted.
Yep, you're good, Janet. Thank you.
So, I mean, you covered it really, really well, Thomas. But the situation, it's important for people to understand how fluid and unpredictable the situation is. So every Thursday, the State Department of Health receives information, as do all states in the country, about our national allocation of vaccine for the next week for first doses. That's how many doses of Pfizer and how many doses of Moderna. So early in the week, the DOH is assembling the requests for vaccine from all of the different enrolled vaccine providers. So that includes Department of Health run pods and the hospitals and the university and all of the places that, and private provider, or the FQHCs now, all the places that are administering vaccine. And then from when those requests are all assembled, and then we get the allocation. And then there's, over the course of just a few hours, a distribution of the actual allocation in accordance with the requests that were made. And in the last couple of weeks, as our vaccinating capacity has increased, the supply has not increased in accordance. So Dr. Char and General Hara and Ron Balahadia worked together to distribute the allocation that we receive as equitably as possible among all of those requests and submit that order. Subsequently, on Sunday, the state gets another allocation, which is of, again, both types of vaccine intended for second dose use. And this is what I meant by the national allocation is taking that need into account. And so there's a second round of vaccine allocation, again, in looking at the requests that were made for that week. And that order is then submitted a few hours later on Sunday. So then during the week, vaccine is received in at least 2 different shipments in accordance with those 2 orders, and the cycle repeats, but there's no knowledge about what's coming more than 1 week in advance. And to additionally complicate it, sometimes what's actually delivered is either significantly less or sometimes significantly more than the allocation we were told we were getting. So everybody's doing their best to work within that. And once those orders are placed, the vaccine doesn't come to the DOH and then the DOH sends it out. It's shipped directly to all of the ordering entities, all of the entities that requested it. With some of the entities can't receive like the Pfizer vaccine themselves, so they'll share it. So for example, on Kauai, Wilcox Hospital gets it, but they then subdivide it to the other smaller hospitals. So I hope that helps.
Thanks so much, Janet. Another question, MRC has scheduled 2 doses to first responders in the next 2 weeks. Are we going to get those shots? I apologize, I'm not sure what MRC refers to, Janet. I'm not sure if you do.
Yeah, MRC is the Medical Reserve Corps.
Okay,
and
thanks.
I don't know which island this is about or who's administering that vaccine, but whoever is administering that vaccine is requesting vaccine as part of the process that I described. So what will arrive next week will not be known until later today. The state got its allocation information today, and that work is probably going on right now to decide how the order will be divided up among all of the people who requested it. And then those entities will get an email either later today or tomorrow telling them, you requested this many doses, this is how many you're going to be able to get out of the allocation. And then there will be a second such process on Sunday. So I can't tell you, yes, you in particular will or won't get it. I can just tell you that there's a process in place to distribute the available vaccine as equitably as possible, and that demand exceeds supply statewide and nationally. This isn't a Hawaii issue, it's a national issue.
Thanks so much, Anna. And to add to that, we've seen a slight increase. I've seen some national surveys where up to 60 and 65% of the national population is now willing to get that vaccine, which is about 10 to 50% higher than, previously when the first, when the Moderna and the Pfizer were first approved. So once again, 10 to 50% may not seem like a lot, but when you apply it to the national population, you can imagine how many thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that is. Very appreciative for the questions and for the comments and the help from Janet and the rest, Dr. Wu. And I want to make sure we have 15 minutes left and we still get to our traditional data dive, because there are a couple good of the science highlights that I wanted to share with everybody on the webinar. So once again, if you have Q&As, just post them and I'll get to them. So Japan, hopefully now on a true decline, continue to watch even as they are doing their genetic sequencing and identifying that Brazil strain, and they're still waiting to provide data on whether or not that new Brazil strain has increases or in transmission rates. Our national overview, once again, touching wood, that it appears that we are now on a decline, which seems of what has seemed like a very, very long third surge. So once again, continuing the good work nationally, but that's going to impact us Hawaii eventually. well, one thing to note as I go back a slide, is that there are over 30 states that have reported the B11, I think 8, the UK strain, and CDC expects that to be the dominant strain by March. So once again, hopefully with mask wearing and increased vaccination efforts, that will we won't see as steep of an increase once this new strain takes hold. And there have been initial studies that have shown continued efficacy of the Pfizer, Moderna mRNA vaccines against the UK strain. We're still waiting on some data for the South African strain. Arizona, trend down, slight uptick up, but hopefully that's just just a weekly change and nothing more than that. California also seems to be on a downward trend. Same with Nevada and same with Texas. So once again, that reflects the overall national trend of returning, hopefully, to a much lower 7-day average of new COVID cases, and then by result, hospitalizations and ICUs. Hawai'i Overview, cases per 100,000. We are still above that 10 per 100,000 for Maui statewide and Honolulu. Our percent positivity, however, we are trending in the right direction. If you drive on the H1 or on the H2, you'll see that our 7-day average on Oahu County, Honolulu County has continued to decline, as does our percent positivity. So that's a good confirmation that hopefully our disease circulation is on the downward trend as well. So whoever asked that question, you can access the slide on DOH's website, and you know, if you look at the first, I think 3 weeks ago we started sharing the slide. It's evolved even in that 3 weeks. So DOH continues to improve their data visualization and sharing the data to the best of their extent in terms of providing clarity, so that we're not left wondering what's going on. And this is super helpful. You can see, you know, the number of doses administered by week, and also by county, and then also now we're starting to see how many doses have been received statewide and administered. So once again, hopefully the goal, I'm sure that DOH Janet and her colleagues that we are trying to do is to answer as many questions so that there's people can feel confident about the process. Testing turnaround time continues to be great. So in terms of capacity, no concerns there. As we return to a hopefully lower consistent threshold for viral load or viral transmission in the state. For our HiPAM forecast, speaking with Levi, we've adjusted our forecast to mirror what we've been seeing on the data side from our partners at DocD and DOH, and trying to incorporate other travel data. But once again, I think Dr. Char was on a press conference today. I missed it, but I caught the gist in terms of it's only a matter of time. It's when, not if, Hawaii will see that UK strain or other mutated strains in Hawaii. So once again, that's a call to continue our physical distancing efforts, our mask wearing, etc. Even as our vaccine efforts continue to go underway. And I apologize, I did not have my video on. Once again, not going to spend too much time on this slide. This is just a numerical version of what we saw in the previous slide. Francis, great question. I will get to that. Hopefully, I only need a few more minutes, and maybe Dr. Behrman can respond to that. I'm not as familiar with the CDC VAM system, but definitely want to get to your question. So two science highlights. We had a great. I wanted to focus more on the testing and the advances on testing, since we spent so much time on the vaccine effort. So there was an evaluation of the Abbott Bionax Now rapid antigen test. So this is a point of care test that has been deployed and hopefully will become more and more utilized. It's a 15 to 30 minute response to get your results. And there was a paper that was published in the MMWR 2 days ago, And then the other one is factors associated with U.S. public motivation to use and distribute COVID-19 self-tests. So once again, I know there's a lot of tests, PCR versus nucleic amplification tests, and then your antigen test, and then finally your antibody test. But your antigen tests are still provide a cross-section in terms of, do you at this moment in time have COVID, just utilizing a different methodology compared to the PCR test. Specifically the Abbott Binax now 15 to 30-minute results. Their numbers are a little higher. They're reporting, I think, 85% sensitivity, and then 94% depending on when that person is in their infectious disease stage. In this particular study in MMWR, it had a 64% sensitivity for symptomatic persons, which makes sense, and then 36% sensitivity for asymptomatic persons. What's interesting is that there's a near 100% specificity, which is correctly identifying those who do not have COVID at that time, and that kind of goes against what Abbott was putting out, where their specificity declines over time, after 8 days of infection. And it's of note that administering the test in lower prevalence will also result in a lower positive predictor value. But this is good confirmatory results of true in the field use of a rapid antigen test point of care, in terms of how it can be used in certain situations to reduce or to quickly identify those who are infectious, and we can and thinking about how we can deploy this and model this for some scenarios for our leaders. This is just good confirmatory data. And this ties into the other science highlight, where, based on 584 respondents, a lot of those respondents were motivated to either use these self-test kits themselves, or to give it to people who were potentially infected, or to order it for themselves. Understandably, when they looked at some comparisons, those with above average income or higher education were more likely to use it. But that also, thinking about vaccines and declination, it might also just be, they understand the benefits of using it more and more. So I think this is once again more good news, and how do we translate these two science highlights to policy, or to inform our policymakers? It shows that there's a desire to have data and to test, and to a point where, when we get very good maybe saliva testing, it might become part of our daily regimen, where we just take a saliva test and we make sure we see if we're positive or negative for that day, and then that becomes part of our normal routine. Not saying that's going to happen, but trying to think about how we can utilize this technology to supplement what we're doing with the vaccine efforts to reduce transmission. So that's just what I wanted to share with everybody. And then, so Francis, your question: does delay in reporting to the CDC VAM system affect allocation? I can't speak to that. Maybe Dr. Wu, Dr. Berryman, do you have, or Angie, do you have any thoughts on that? And then if you do, please raise your hand, and then Rukia will work her magic, and I'll stop sharing.
I'm sorry, Thomas, if you don't mind refreshing me, I will see if I
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, of course. So the question from Francis, and we have 5 minutes left, so not to rush, but just to be mindful of our time. So his question is: does delay in reporting to the CDC VAM system affect allocation?
No, I don't. Well, I say no definitively. I don't believe it does. It does affect, people see the disconnect between how much we've received in the state and how many doses we've administered. So that's because there's a delay from when we administer the doses to when we've collected all that data from all of the sites. So the public reporting of doses administered is always going to lag behind doses received. But I believe the national allocation is based on population and demographics, and not on doses administered.
Thanks so much, Janet. It's that time again. Thank you everybody for your participation. I think I always continue to learn a lot from our participants, and thank you for your participation. For anybody who's attending, if there are any specific issues that you have questions on that you feel HiPAM might be able to answer, or you just have questions, please send them to our email, and that might be a future webinar topic, provided we have the expertise, or we can find someone who's willing to hop on and provide a great presentation or webinar. So I'll leave everybody with that. Please have a safe weekend. And continue to mask up, and we'll get through this, and understand that everybody's working as hard as they can from the state and federal perspective. And then one last thing, if you are on federal property, starting today, you are required to wear a mask. I know state, obviously we have that, but now on all federal property, you are required to wear a mask. So I want to make sure no one gets in trouble for that. But have a great weekend, everybody, and we will see you next week, Thursday. Thank you.